Welcome to In It to Win It. This is Steve Barton, and thank you for tuning in. Today we have fan favorite Lobo Tiggre of the Independent Speculator. We're going to get his take on the economy, precious metals, copper, uranium, and of course, the questions you submitted. We will learn where Lobo sees the next tsunami of money going so we can front run it. Lobo, thank you for coming back on the show.
Thank you, Steve. I'm glad to be in it to win it.
Yes, sir. We all are as well. All righty, let's start out like we always do. And what is your macro view of the world economy and financial markets today?
Well, bearing in mind that I'm a due diligence guy, right? For almost 20 years, Doug Casey sent me to go kick rocks on his behalf. I'm not an economist, which might actually be to my advantage in answering the questions, since the wrong way Corrigans of modern economics never seem to get it right. Certainly not if they're named to a central bank. That said, I'm sorry, I'm reminded of Doug Casey's and Rick Rule's frequent joke that, I've predicted the last 10 of the last 3 recessions and that sort of thing. So I was on hard landing last year, and a lot of people are saying, "Oh, Lobo, you weren't wrong. You were early. It's coming now." And that's very kind of people to say that, but it seems like Trumpcession is what's happening now. And so I don't want to claim credit for being right if it's a completely different thing. Now, honestly, I think we might still be headed that way even without Trumpcession. I certainly don't think Harris would have improved the economy. And the piper is still waiting to be paid from all the crazy things done, during the COVID lockdowns and afterwards. So, but I don't want to try to make excuses for myself. I said before, undeniable recession by the end of last year. There is certainly plenty of denial still in force. So it makes me, it's not just that I don't want to be wrong again, but it makes me very cautious about what seems fairly clear. Like the Trumpcession seems very hard to avoid. Mr. Market has been celebrating last week that oh, it's not so bad. We've got all these deals coming. Yay. Woohoo. The worst is behind us. It seems that was the message last week. And I think Mr. Market is just dead wrong. Like the impact of what's been done hasn't really hit yet. The fear of what's been announced has hit, but the actual impact, even if Trump steps back on it, it's not all going away. So that actual impact has yet to hit. And I don't think it's accurately priced in. I do think there's more pain ahead, but it's not just that I was wrong last year. I'm ever mindful of the money helicopters is really where I'm going with this. So the outlook, I might, have to pull a United Airlines here. But if Congress is slow to send the money helicopters, and bear in mind, it's not just monetary policy that can ease up if things get scary. Don't forget the stimmy checks and the money helicopters, which have never really stopped flying since COVID-19. If Congress, mindful of midterms, decides that recession is no fault of anybody's own, and therefore everybody deserves thousands and thousands of dollars in freebies, that can happen regardless of what Powell or even Trump thinks. So I imagine Trump would be on board with that to try to, shore up his ratings. So if that happens, our friend Lynn Alden's fiscal dominance theory, comes back into play with a vengeance, and we may not get that Trumpcession, even if in some ways we richly deserve it. So I don't know, I guess is the honest answer. But the A outlook is Trumpcession, and the B outlook is like reflationary boom based on fiscal profligacy. In either one of these cases, I think you actually end up in that reflationary boom either way. The question is how much pain are the politicians willing to endure first? History suggests little or none, right? But we'll have to see. I mean, there is Trump shock is not done. Actually, the actual real world impact of Trump shock is yet to be felt. So it may be too late to avoid some pain. We'll have to see. That's my context. Sorry not to be able to say, here's the answer. You could, take that to the bank.
No, that was good.
Listen to anybody who said that in uncharted waters as we are.
Yeah, so I haven't heard that Trumpcession. That's a good one.
And it's not my invention, actually. I guess I listen to, I try to not to stay in the echo chamber. So I listen to mainstream financial media. you could think of it as it being important to know what the enemy is thinking, but not really. It's not so hostile. We participate in global markets, and few people in the U.S. around the world are stacking silver, and these aren't our people that are the counterparties to most of our trades. So we do have to know what they're thinking. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. So you could see a recession coming. A lot of the impacts that the new administration has come in, we're not feeling yet at all. There's a lag effect. It takes a while for these things to go in.
Right, right. And we had a bunch of CEOs just visit the White House to tell Trump, you're looking at empty shelves if the 145 stays, not 45, the 145%, tariff. And you've seen administration spokespersons kind of walking that back and softening it, but nothing's actually changed yet.
Okay.
So we'll see.
Okay. And so that's on one hand. The other caveat here is, what do central banks generally do whenever they're afraid of a recession? Is they print. And that's on the other side of it. If we get a massive stimulus in Congress with midterms coming up, that's also on the table. So those are kind of the two outlooks that you have right now, and what you're positioning for.
Right. The takeaway here is either higher inflation sooner or higher inflation a little less sooner. Either one. I cannot envision a scenario in which today's politicians see, at least in the United States, a world of hurt, voters hurting and saying, oh, this is necessary pain. It's short-term pain for long-term gain. It's worth it. Tighten your belt, think World War II, Rosie the Riveter, right? I just don't see that class of politician on the stage right now. And I don't think the average voter out there, with all due respect, I don't think they have that intestinal fortitude that our grandparents had. So I may be wrong, maybe I'm arrogant or judgmental, but I'm just trying to call it like I see it.
Yeah, I love talking to everyday people. When I go to the restaurants, talking to the waiter, just kind of getting their perspective. And I think you're absolutely right. They have no idea what's going on, and their solution to it is give me a check.
Well, they're unwilling to experience pain. There are some. I have met people even without a MAGA hat who approve of the Trump agenda, buy into Doge, and say yes. We're going to have to suffer some pain here, but not many. Most people are like, oh, I'm on the edge. I can barely keep my, the waitress she's a single mom. She's got 3 kids and not sure how she's going to feed them. If anything goes bad, tips haven't been as good as they were before all this scare, all that kind of, that's what I'm hearing from most people.
Yeah. Yep. I'm hearing exactly the same. Okay. That pretty much hit David's question. Okay. So what commodities have most of your attention right now?
Fairly simple. My favorite commodities right now are gold, silver, copper, and uranium. We can dive into any of these as far as you want to go, but the quick take would be, it's hard to pound the table about, yeah, gold's going to the moon when it's already hit. I mean, it actually came very close on the futures to a real all-time high if we use CPI to adjust for inflation. And even if you say, okay, well, CPI is not real, but it's still quite a phenomenal peak. I mean, nobody can look at $3,500 gold and say, oh, that's dirt cheap. Okay, maybe it should be higher, but you can't say that's the bottom, right? This is not a bottom feeder opportunity. That makes it difficult for me to say, yeah, rush out and buy gold stocks or gold or whatever. And it's no longer true that the stocks are in stealth mode, at least the ones that are actually delivering or have projects of real merit. Those stocks have moved. So even those aren't a bottom fishing opportunity. So what I'm saying is all the reasons why gold has gone where it's gone, they're all still on the table. None of that has changed. And if we're right about what we were just saying before about the Trump shock itself still coming, let alone the monetary and fiscal response, all of this is extremely bullish for gold. And that's completely putting aside all the central bank buying, which there's no reason for that to stop. So I really don't see a strong bear case for gold. But, it's a hockey stick, right? Anytime you're looking at a hockey stick, it's hard to bet on another hockey stick going way above that.
That's a
Yeah.
hockey stick, all right.
That's like, right. So how can you stand on that peak and say, oh, we can only go up from here? Maybe if the angels come down from on high and wing us higher. And to be clear, I'm not outlining a bear case. I'm just saying it's dangerous to believe it can only go up from here. That said, if you adjust gold for other things besides CPI, as our audience likes to say, right? There's a long way to go. If you adjust it for M2, money supply, like if gold is money and the main alternative is dollars, if you adjust gold, this is, I shouldn't weigh my arms when I say this, but this is a mathematical fact. If you adjust gold for M2, an all-time high in gold would be somewhere in the neighborhood of $12,000 an ounce, which happens to fit that number we've heard from people saying what it would take to back all the dollars in the world with the gold in Fort Knox, if it's there, right? So it's interesting. That's not a target. Please don't put that as a headline. Lobo Tiggre predicts $12,000 gold. I'm just saying, though, that if you're not going to use CPI and try to use something else to come up with a realistic price, there is plenty of room. So please don't say I'm a bear. That said, standing on a peak, it's hard for me to say it's all going higher, which makes me sort of more interested in silver at the time. Silver fans rejoice. That said, silver, last week, silver did better than gold. If you're betting on silver as a monetary metal, that's actually not good. It was up with oil and copper, not gold. So, and don't take that the wrong way either. I'm not making a bear case for silver. I've said this before, and people seem to brush it off because they get all angry about the things that they don't like hearing me say about silver. But post-Trumpcession, either it happens or it blows over and it doesn't happen, and we're into that reflationary phase. I see silver as the win-win because it gets the same mojo from gold as a monetary metal in that inflationary context, but as an industrial metal, it has all kinds of tailwinds that gold doesn't have. So short term, the fact that silver is acting wonky, the gold silver ratio has people all up in arms. Oh, it's got to close. Well, it can close by gold coming down rather than silver going up. And even if, yes, it's got to close, that doesn't mean those alligator jaws can't open wider before they snap shut. So it's extremely dangerous to say, yeah, silver's got to go to the moon tomorrow, or even this month or this quarter. Right. I'm still in the camp, believe it or not, all those people with the rotten tomatoes are ready to throw at me. I'm still in the camp that silver probably outperforms gold before this cycle is done, late stage catch up. But that doesn't incline me to buy right now, right? If while silver's acting wonky and separating itself from gold, I'm looking for a little more clarity there. On copper, that's a structural supply constraint issue. There's just not enough of it. And even without electric cars and without AI centers and all this stuff, we still need more copper than we're going to have. So I see that as a multi-decade bull market. And, I'm itching to buy, but I don't want to buy in front of that possible Trumpcession. I want to be clear that it does or doesn't happen. And then off I go. And on uranium right now, as we speak, has been carving out a bottom visibly on the charts. So I've been a bull the whole time, but I've actually not been buying, Steve, for almost a year and a half. I was worried about the peak we saw in early 2024. I was warning of it in late 23, and I was right. And I've been waiting since then to put more money at play in this space. I think we're there. I think high prices have already cured high prices. Just about everybody that had new pounds to bring to market, from the very biggest and best producers in the business to the juniors trying to build their own, they're late, or they're underproducing, or they're moving the goalposts. And all that uranium in those models that said, might oversupply the market in the near term, I think almost all of that has missed the mark. So I'm extremely bullish. I think it's oversold. I think fear of a broader market correction, it's not without justice, because, markets crash, uranium stocks are stocks. Sure, there's volatility risk there. But don't forget that in 3 of the last 4 recessions, uranium actually was trading slightly up to significantly up during those recessionary periods, because baseload power, still got to have it, right? And the fourth one, the time that uranium dropped during the recession, not last, but during that recession was 2008. And it's not that 2008 was an outlier. It's that uranium peaked in 2007. It was, it went up nutso to 140 and was already screaming back down when 2008 hit. So that's arguably had nothing to do with a recession. It was already in correction. So to be clear, I'm not saying uranium can't go lower. I'm not saying you can't get hurt buying uranium stocks if, there is a big market panic or a crash even. I'm saying that the crash is not certain. The money helicopters are in the air. Uranium has already corrected enough for high prices to be from being a concern to now low prices being a tailwind. And for whatever it's worth, my wolf whiskers are twitching. I am personally now ready to put money into the market. I put out a shopping list to my clients of the Independent Speculator, and unfortunately, all those stocks moved before I got to them. So I haven't done it yet, but I've sent I've got a bunch of cash in my brokerage accounts, and uranium is actually the top of my shopping list right now. It would be gold if gold wasn't at a peak, but it's not, and I'm still waiting on copper, not sure about silver. So that actually makes uranium the number one thing that I'm keen to spend money on or speculate on right now.
Awesome. Okay. Wow, that was quite a breakdown. Thank you. Okay, so gold, you see the same chart we do. It's screaming up to the top, and although the fundamentals are just, nothing but tailwinds for gold, sometimes you got to take a little bit of a breather. Silver, with the gold-silver ratio has your attention, but, how can I say this? It can go at extremes, and if all you do is pay attention to ratios like that, you could end up getting yourself burned. I mean, I could see a case for the gold silver ratio getting up to like 150, maybe even 200 or something if things got. Central banks are buying gold, they're not buying silver.
Especially if we go the Trumpcession route, which is not a guarantee. But if the industrial side weighs down on silver, takes it down to 30 or lower again, at the same time, fear sends gold north of 3,500 towards 4,000. Like, it's not even tinfoil hat Lobos like me that are calling for higher gold prices. It's mainstream Wall Street firms are talking $4,000 gold. I mean, that's really something. So, please hold on to your rotten tomato, silver bulls. I'm not saying I want this to happen or even that it's the most likely thing to happen. But a gold silver ratio over 100 doesn't guarantee that it can't go higher before those alligator jaws sharp. And here's the other thing to keep in mind. Yes, extremes on the GSR, like any data series, there's almost always a reversion to mean unless the market completely changes.
Here's the GSR.
Like when there was a time when aluminum was very expensive because it was it's very chemically active. It takes a lot of energy to extract it. So when aluminum was first discovered, it was very expensive. And if I'm remembering correctly, they put an aluminum cap on top of the Washington Monument in Washington, D.C., because at that time, it was more precious than gold, or on that order. Like it was a sign of honor. It's not like a soda can wrapper. It's aluminum, this wonderful expensive metal. And then they figured out ways of extracting aluminum much more cheaply, and it became this bulk, industrial commodity. I'm not saying this is what's happening with silver, but I'm just that's the kind of thing that a market change where things just never go back to the way they were before. Aluminum has never gone back to the way it was before. So what I'm saying is that the ratio by itself doesn't tell you which commodity is going to move, but there is something that I do find useful in the ratio, and that is once it's going in a certain direction. Like right now, those jaws have been widening. While that's happening, that doesn't make me want to stick my hands in the jaws. But once it turns, once they're closing, at that point we know what's happening. Either gold's coming down or silver's going up, and those changes have momentum. Like right now, the upward GSR has momentum. When it reverses and it goes down, you're not going to see it drop to 75 and then go back up to, 125, right? If it reverses, if it rolls over, then that downward move will, in the past, it has always had some momentum, and that becomes investable depending on which metal is moving. If that's happening with silver going up, then that would actually prompt me to start buying more silver stocks like now. Like that would change my marching orders.
Okay, interesting. Here's the GSR. I'll bring it up real quick. Let me go to the weekly basis so we can see a bit. Yeah, so you're talking about these parabolic moves. We just shot way up about that.
Right.
If you
I mean,
start to
look at
see
the
that
previous
going
one you have right on there.
right here.
Once it peaked,
Yeah.
it went, it did, it was volatility on the way down, but it just kept going down for, I'm not sure what your time frame is there, but it looks like months.
Each one of these bars is a week. So yeah, some
Right.
pretty violent moves in short order.
But the point is that they tend to continue. Like the ups and the downs, the greens and the reds, they tend to last for a while. That's what I'm saying. So if that chart starts showing, reds, reds, reds,
yeah.
and if that's happening because silver's going up, that makes silver more investable. If that's happening because gold is coming down, that's not good for either silver or gold.
Good point. Good point. Okay, so that's gold and silver. Copper, you like that story a lot simply because of things we've talked about in the past, supply shortages, just not enough big mines coming online. We're going to need more of that. Barring a recession, typically
Right.
copper gets
Right.
whacked.
So there's nothing really new there. And people say, oh, Lobo, you're trying to time the market. If you're so bullish, why don't you just buy? No, I'm not trying to time the market. I don't know where the bottom is. I have no prediction on that, but I want to watch for it. And, okay, to be fair to the people asking that question, if I was a private investor without 40,000 very best friends looking over my shoulder, right, I might just go ahead and buy the current dip because I'm that confident of where it's going. And I really don't care where the bottom is. But as a public figure, if I say, oh, time to go ahead and buy copper, and then Trumpcession, it really hits hard and scares the bejesus out of everybody. And copper drops to $3 or something like that. And the stock's, 50%, name your haircut, right? If that happens after I say I'm buying copper, people will not forgive me for that. So I'd rather miss the bottom, and see it clearly in the rearview mirror and pay a little bit more and have confidence that the trajectory is upwards than to say, it's cheap enough and then have a bunch of people get hurt. So take that under advisement. But basically what I'm saying is, I'm just not worried about copper. I'm that bullish on it, but I'm not timing the market, but I'm picking my entry point. I don't think I'm going to miss the boat entirely if I wait a little bit more for a little bit more clarity, especially with not, so many clear signs of this Trumpcession there. If it doesn't happen, then okay, I missed the bottom. I'll still have plenty of time to make money in the years and decades ahead.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And uranium, it looks to you like it's carving out a bottom. I'm seeing the same kind of thing. That sounds like your number one conviction for this year. And
I have never been convicted of anything besides a speeding ticket. When people tell me they get mad because I say something that I hope is realistic, oh, he's got no conviction. I always think, oh, good.
I'll share the uranium chart here, and this is the carving out of the bottom that you're talking is right there. This is the spot price.
Now notice that happened twice on the way down since 106.
Yeah, you got that one right there, a fake out.
This one is a little bit longer, and this one is happening below long-term contract. So it is different this time.
Yeah. Long-term contracts are right here at 80.
Right. Before, you could make the argument that, well, it's still high and, high prices could still be curing high prices. And lo and behold, that did happen. I think you can't make that argument now. I think the context is different enough that, well, I mean, it's a speculation. I don't know that it can't go lower. And certainly, a nuclear accident would do that, or maybe Trump announcing that he's come up with a deal with Putin to turn new nuclear warheads into nuclear fuel would hurt the market. But I think there's, Trump's been quiet on that front lately, and I think there's zero chance that Putin will agree with that, and less than zero that China, like Putin might announce something just to make a feel good press release. I don't believe for a moment that Russia would significantly de-arm, not with the conflict in the world. And and China, they're still building out their nuclear arsenal. So I just think that the reality was never there. The scare on that front, it was in the headlines for a while, but the realities are never there. So and meanwhile, the fundamentals just keep getting better and better. I just in the last few hours, 48 hours, the Chinese announced 10 new reactors just got approved. 10 at
Oh,
once.
nice. I didn't
Right.
know that.
And it just keeps, it's the Energizer Bunny in the BRICS world on there, perhaps literally Energizer. So the fundamentals never went away from me. Spot tends to be volatile. You can look at it spot versus long term, and it frequently runs ahead, overcorrects, but it does track.
Yeah.
And if nothing else, this is a key takeaway. Like if the long term contract price is the real market is still holding around 80. It's fluctuated a bit. It's been going sideways. So there's no rollover in the real market, and the spot market can only ignore that for so long. There were some people that bought some pounds, when they were $30 a pound and so on, in order to finance mine construction and other things like that. And some of those people have been selling some of those pounds. But it's looking to me like that source has pretty much dried up, and we're carving out a bottom. Never say never, but I am personally willing to put my money where my mouth is on this, and I'm looking to deploy like this week.
Nice. I'm going to share, this is courtesy of Cameco, and this is exactly what you're talking about. If we go to the right side of the chart here, let me just zoom in, and the black is the long-term price, and the blue is the spot price, and we can see that we had a nice run up here. This is where we all sold. And then now the alligator jaws have gone the other way. And the short-term pricing, the spot pricing, is down at, I think, 66. And long-term pricing is still is at 80. So the cheapest
it's very funny.
contract,
Actually,
12
that
months
peak
out.
in January of 24 was when Joe Martin took that famous picture of me and everybody else on the uranium panel over there, and me at the other side saying, taking a bit of profits here. We've had a hockey stick. Where have we heard that before? My name was mud that day, but not long after.
Yeah. Proved right. There we go. And I'm in the same camp as you. I think that if there's a place to store cash, putting it in physical uranium, I really don't see a huge downside for that, in that 12 months from now, the price is $14 higher than it is today, $14 higher than it is today. And the lights still got to come on. You know what I mean? Like utilities, basic things that people need to survive will do fine during a recession, like food and electricity.
Right. Yeah, these people on Bloomberg and so on that they look at the energy sector. People, the tech sector. But what company isn't a tech company these days? Even McDonald's is a tech company if you go in the place, right? These sectors are all artificial definitions, and lumping uranium and nuclear in with other forms of energy. Okay, it's energy. I can understand why they do that, but its market is driven by such different factors. When people are tightening their belts and they decide, okay, maybe we don't need to go visit grandma every weekend. We'll do it every other weekend or once a month or something like that. We'll drive a little bit less, right? We'll fly a little bit less. We're seeing this in the data, right? This economic concern hits some energy products much harder than others, but nobody says, oh, I'm worried about the economy, so I'm going to dim the lights at the airport or the hospital. Right. And that's what your baseload power, which nuclear is so good at, delivers. So, yeah, I just think it's a mistake. Now, the fact that it's a mistake to look at nuclear with everything else in the so-called energy sector doesn't stop the mainstream from doing that. So you get these knee-jerk reactions where, uranium stocks will sell off with oil and gas, even when they shouldn't. And so if you agree with me on this, dear audience, if we're right and the market is wrong, the market is giving you a gift or giving us a gift. That's the way I see that. Now maybe we're wrong. We've missed something. But as long as we believe what we believe, like if this is my analysis, how can I not act on that analysis? If the market is mispricing something, that is an opportunity.
Yep, I agree, sir. Okay, let's go on to Flex's question. He says, do you believe that one day it will be possible to bank in the U.S. in gold-denominated accounts, in other words, accounts backed 100% by gold, rather than in dollar savings accounts? And if so, what impact will this have on the price of gold?
Well, I could write a science fiction novel, which would tell us a pretty story about what this. I don't mean to offend the questioner, but this is a what might the future do, and we can imagine many things. Clearly, you know, gold becoming not just recognized as money by gold bugs like us, but de facto money in the system again. That creates a new offtake, if you will. Maybe demand isn't the right word, but a new offtake. It sequesters a lot of gold that's not going to be going anywhere else. I think that's very very bullish for the gold dollar exchange rate, as I call it, not the price of gold, because gold is money. So it's a forex question in my view. But I could give you a number. Who knows? I mean, we just talked about a number, right? If you look at M2, which isn't even like the broadest measure of money, right? It takes quite a bit to back the dollar with gold. But this isn't going to happen anytime soon. Even if this does happen, even if the BRICS push it forward, let's say, for example, this will take years to implement. And so as a human being in the world, I find this kind of thought experiment to be interesting, not just amusing, but actually encouraging to know that there is an answer. Once the powers that be screw things up so badly that they have no point but to come back to reality, because at the end of the day, reality always matters. It's good to know that this is out there. But this makes no difference whatsoever for my investment decision making now. This potential in the future doesn't tell me what's going to happen from gold at 3,300. Does it go up or down next? Does it go higher or lower over the next year or two, which is my usual investment time frame? This story about where we might go in the future makes no difference to that. So I don't spend a lot of time thinking about it, but I will say I actually do think that at some point in the future, gold backing does happen. When the profligates around the world, when the whole fiat house of cards comes down, and I do think it will eventually, then real stuff to back your currency, whatever it is, maybe it's not just gold. Maybe that's not the only thing. In today's world, it doesn't have to be. But gold is the easy and obvious one. It's so much concentrated value. It doesn't tarnish, right? You can just put it in a vault and lock it away and back things with it. So it makes lots of sense. The reasons why Aristotle gave us 2,000 plus years ago why gold was money, they're still valid.
Okay. All righty. Not something that's probably likely to happen soon, but something that when you study the course of history always happens. It goes back to gold, and in modern age, that could happen where it's something where it's digital gold that's stored in your account. Okay. Now, I'm guessing this is a silver question, although he doesn't say it, but he says, Trader wants to know, could you please comment on the Mexico permitting situation? Do you see actual progress there, or is it just smoke and mirrors? He's asking both open pit and underground.
Right. So, yeah, it's silver adjacent. It certainly helps if you're looking. That is an issue for me right now, even to the degree that I'm, if I saw a screaming bargain in the silver space, I might not wait to have more clarity on silver. If it was a screaming bargain, I mean, I'm bullish on silver.
Yeah.
So what happens in the near term would not stop me if I saw a screaming bargain. The problem with screaming bargains is they tend to be in basket case countries going in the wrong direction. So to answer for Mexico, I will say actually encouraged might be too strong a word. I'm less fearful of Mexico than I was before. It does seem that Scheinbaum's bark was worse than her bite. She does seem to have, I won't call her pro-business, but she does seem to understand that if you kill the goose, you ain't getting no more golden eggs. And there is some reality constraint there. So not as virulently anti-business as I feared. That's good. We have seen some permitting in Mexico, but not open pit mines. So even mining seems to be not as bad as I feared under this new administration in Mexico. But the short answer to the question is it's not good enough news yet that I'm willing to invest in Mexico yet. I have not changed my marching orders on that at all. If I see a big open pit mine get permitted, that would be material. I would then start looking at investing in Mexico. Until then, nice sounding words, friendly words, that doesn't cut it for me. I want to see actual evidence that you can move these projects forward. And even that would not make Mexico perfectly safe. Even if they started permitting a series of open pit projects, people having their licenses revoked, or having 12 years magically changed to 2 years on their renewals, ridiculous lawsuits tying up perfectly, any mine is going to leave some scar in the earth, but there are much more benign operations than others. There's some that are relatively, and for these things to get tied up for years and years in the courts under the most spurious circumstances, none of this makes Mexico a great mining jurisdiction. So what I'm saying is, if we start seeing the right kind of permitting news, then at some point, price will trump risk. If we have a real bargain in Mexico, I might be willing to take the risk. I'm not there yet.
Okay. Politicians can talk all they want, but as soon as you start to see stuff actually happen, then you'll take notice and action. All righty. Hermand is asking, basically, I guess, another question about political risk. He says, there was recently a positive and almost joint statement from several Canadian political leaders regarding the necessity of bringing a few named projects forward by making permitting easier. Would such a statement affect how you regard a mining company from a due diligence standpoint?
Mostly no. I mean, if they make the list, then obviously that's bullish for those particular companies. But it's really interesting that Trump's version of this was that he gave the agencies 10 days to come up with a list of critical minerals projects and other critical projects that need to get permitted. And then he gave them 10 days to issue the permits. I don't think any of this has actually happened yet, but that's what the executive order said. It was basically 20 days to permit in hand with shiny wet ink. And Canada's version of accelerating the permit process, I don't remember what the number was, but it was like 18 months or 24 months or something. This was the accelerated.
That was the fast track.
Don't look a gift horse in the mouth. 2 years is much better than 10. But, politicians, lips moving, show me the permit.
Yeah. Okay. Basically the same answer, even though it's Canada, doesn't. Okay, let's move on to copper. Jake wants to know about copper being, now that the tariff narrative is causing chaos and everything, are there some countries that you would be more open to copper than others? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, we'll see. We don't actually have tariff clarity on the copper front. It's kind of ridiculous. Copper goes up to an all-time high nominally when Trump signs an executive order on copper. But the executive order is what? It's not a tariff. It's not Operation Warp Speed. It's a study group. Woo! Like, that tells us nothing. Yeah. And by the way, remember what happened with the study group on uranium? They deliberated for 2 years, and then it didn't really do anything. Anyway, so copper goes screaming up to a nominal all-time high based on this announcement that was a huge nothing burger, and then nothing happens and it comes back again. And so it's been volatile up and down. But I think there are a lot of players in this marketplace that are working on assumptions that are just ill-founded, and there is potential to get hurt in the near term if there's disappointment. To the question, and by the way, I love that we have all these questions. You and I can talk about what we think is important, but it's much more important to find out what the audience actually wants to hear about. So I'm glad for this. But so, okay, I can see Trump's agenda and why reindustrializing America needs to do all these things and, whacking China and so on. But why on earth would he need to whack Peru? Peru is one of the biggest copper producers in the world, and there's Chile, right? Are the Chileans ripping off America for decades and decades? I don't think so. So I think there are assumptions on both sides of the question here that I just think are not well thought out. It is not at all clear to me how this is going to go. And I do think that the reality is that if Trump does anything too aggressive on tariffs on importing copper, you could say, "Ooh, that's great for U.S. copper stories." But there's like one shovel-ready project that if it gets the permit, the tariffs would help right away. Or one obvious one. All the rest are, they're a long way. The permits would just be the beginning. They'd still need to raise the money because, without the permits, nobody's been willing to give them the money to build these projects. There's some that are known, but, the feasibility studies are now many years out of date. So you'd actually, before you could raise the money, you'd have to go back and redo the feasibility on, current market realities. Energy and iron and your inputs, your tires, all that stuff is completely different. So hopefully, and maybe this is why nothing has happened, somebody whispered in Trump's ear, "Sir, if you stop copper from coming into the United States, it'll be 5 years or 10 years before we can replace that supply. We can't make this ourselves. This isn't a question of people ripping us off." So it may be that absolutely nothing happens here at all. And even if it does start happening, I can see issues with finished products, finished copper products, pipes and wires and whatnot coming from China. Yeah, okay. That's easier to start making in the US faster. But in terms of the actual supply, what we invest in the miners, right? How many of us have a copper miner in China? None. Yeah. Right? That's not what we're speculating. So I don't really see this as an investable thesis right now. And I'm hoping that it just kind of goes away and Trump realizes that if he tries to tighten the thumb screws here, it's just going to hurt the US. If he does it anyway, I'm not sure that really helps anybody. If you got a US copper play, there might be a knee-jerk reaction into it, but then reality comes into play. Well, oh gee, we need to raise all this money. We need to redo our feasibility study. We need all this work to do, all this shareholder dilution still ahead of us. So caveat emptor here, buyer beware. The narrative in this space, I think, is extremely dangerous. I'm much more inclined to go with the global players that are, if not impervious to, then at least can't have their business entirely scuttled by the White House.
Okay. All righty. Speaking of one of the American ones that's probably on everyone's mind, and Denham asked, he says, any news on permitting of the Resolution mine in Arizona?
I believe that one was actually mentioned in the list of priority projects. As far as I know, no permit yet. And there's also court action there. Don't forget. But it is on the short list, is my understanding. I don't hold my feet to the fire on that, but I do believe that I saw it mentioned specifically by name. And, it almost have to be crazy not to include it. That is the high profile case. That is the poster child for ridiculous, regulation and regulation from the bench, right? That sort of thing. So if you want to tell potential suppliers and producers and upgraders of critical minerals that the U.S. is open for business, this is the case that you would want to resolve. That said, I generally don't talk about specific companies, right? I don't give away free analysis on the internet. But this one, I will mention, this is not owned by some junior, right? So if it gets the green light, it's one of the biggest mining companies in the world. So it'd be nice, but it's not a game changer for that company, not on that scale. If this was the flagship asset of some nano cap junior, it would be phenomenal. That would be the sort of stuff that 10 bagger easy, 50 bagger, who knows? Maybe my friend Doug Casey has 3 times landed 100 bagger in mining stocks. I've yet to do that. So that would be a sweet thing if it were so, but it's not the case. So it's something that I'm looking at as a bellwether rather than as an investment thesis for myself.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I feel like Rick and I talk about this company 5 or 6 times a year, and it's never or this mine, and it's never about it opening. It's always about the stupidity of our government. Okay. This was an interesting question. This is from GM. He says, can you ask Lobo's thoughts on copper gold developers, given that you're bullish on both? How could they be seen as kind of a self-hedging play? You know, like recession slash economic risk that would be harmful to copper, be bullish for gold. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a smart question. And when you're bullish on both, you know, a win-win combination is a good thing to have. They tend to be rare though, where it's material. You've got a large copper mine, and this is why they'll give away streams on silver and gold, because it's such a small component of the overall mine that, you know, you'd rather have the project finance without interest rather than the gold or the silver. So, you know, your big copper mines, you know, actually big world-class copper mines are the world's single largest source of silver. But that's like sub 1%. It, you know, it's just that they're so big that they produce that much silver. And when you have something that's got a high gold content, you know, 50-50 copper gold, then that becomes much more interesting on this thesis. It's just that these are rare. There are some examples out there, but you can't just go out and buy them all. If you're a gold and copper bull, you need to look carefully at the metallurgy here. There are times when the copper really buggers your gold recovery, or the opposite. You know, the cyanide likes the copper more than the gold. You send your cyanide through the roof. Or if you have one of these hard to crack copper minerals like energite, it can be really difficult. And you have to choose one or the other. So even if you had 50-50 gold and copper, you might not get that much gold out of it. So I'm sorry, this isn't a simple answer, but I'm saying it is a smart insight. And under the circumstances where I imagine being bullish on both copper and gold, that actually is something that would be a strong plus on my checklist as I'm looking, if I could find something like that. But I have to get into the weeds about, you know, the metallurgy, the recoveries, you know, the encumbrances, the royalties, the streams, right? Have they given away the gold in advance? You know, that doesn't help, whatever. You know, you can't just buy them all.
Okay. Yeah. So basically, in theory, you like it, but it's extremely specific to the project and the company.
Right. And beware of small credits. Like if, you know, 50-50, 60-40, that becomes potentially a self-hedging play like the person is asking about. If it's 80-20, probably not.
Okay. Okay. All righty. Let's move on to your favorite one for 2025, uranium. This is kind of a funny question, but he says, have you sold your entire portfolio and gone 100% uranium miners yet?
No, but my shopping list is 100% uranium miners right now.
Awesome. 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 Okay. A related question here on thorium. Do you follow any, you know, the new technology of thorium, you know, saltwater reactors? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, actually, I my favorite nuclear power plant design. What a strange thing to have a favorite. It's like pistachio ice cream, or blue is my favorite color. But yeah, no, I really like the molten salt reactor design. It's the safest design I can it just the A that I know of, or B that I can even conceive of. You know, the whole crew passes out, you know, unconscious. The thing shuts itself down. If it can't run away, the act of overheating shuts it down. I really just I'm very fond of that design. And of course, you know, thorium was the original molten salt reactor, and that's the plan for those designs, as I understand. And there's two things. One is people have been talking about thorium eating uranium's lunch for like my entire career almost, but it started heating up. There's an evangelist out there, I forget what his name, who's got a bunch of really cool YouTube videos on how this little golf ball size of thorium could power the United States for 100 years or whatever. And he's very persuasive, and he makes sense. And I think that he's basically right. but the technology for making this work, that molten salt is highly corrosive. Being able to make the reaction happen is not the same as being able to sustain it for commercial operation over, years and years and years, as a going concern. So that's been a science project really for my entire career. Now, the Chinese have just announced that they've brought their first thorium reactor online for commercial production, as I understand. That's not just a demonstrator. They're connecting it to the power grid. And you might say, oh, this is it. It's thorium's time to shine. Well, not so fast. It's a reactor. We have to see how it actually performs. This is still really a test. If it performs, and we'll see what they learn, how do we have to sustain it and so on. We're still years from cookie cuttering that thing and just mass producing them like the Hulong 3 or whatever it is that they're doing now, right? The 10 reactors that were just announced were not thorium reactors. So, and then there's the other thing to keep in mind as an investor, is that thorium is very abundant. So if the whole world, goes to thorium, let's say fission just doesn't come and eat everybody. Let's say fusion does not come and eat all fission reactors' lunch. I could see the world going down the thorium pathway in the future. If it does, you're not going to make any money on a thorium mine. I mean, the sand is all over India. I mean, this is very common stuff. So, it's only investable in the sense of it being negative for your uranium, in my view. I'm not going to buy thorium projects. I will start moving out or cycling out of uranium projects if and when thorium really starts taking hold. But my thesis is that that's beyond my investment horizon. Like, that's not happening in the next year or two. Meanwhile, we're going to need the uranium for the plants that are being built now. And all the growth, all these hundreds of plants around the world that are on approved and planned for construction and that are in that process, they all use uranium. Some of them could be multi-fueled, but there's nothing bearish in this thesis during my investment timeframe, and we'll see it coming. If it's China and they start announcing, replicating this and that they're going to go big with thorium, that will be giving us years of head start. Like if they surprise us, Steve, and I hear this announcement tomorrow that the next 20 plants that China builds are going to be all thorium, those plants, even in China, are a couple years in the future, at least. Even in China where they go warp speed on these things. So, and I don't think that's going to happen. So basically what I'm saying is I do like thorium. The nuclear engineering nerd in me loves thorium. But as an independent speculator, it's simply not part of my equations yet. And we will have ample warning when it needs to be.
Okay. All right. I asked Justin Hune the same thing, and he basically said what you did, was that amazing technology. This will be fantastic when it takes over nuclear, but there's no way to make money from it now. And nuclear is the future that's investable now. And that's where we need to put our focus. So awesome. Thank you very much, Lobo. I got to give a shout out to your newsletter. For me, it is a must read every week. I'll put a link down in the pinned comment below and the show notes below to your free newsletter. Go ahead and what can listeners expect when they sign up for your free weekly newsletter?
Well, if you've been hearing me for an hour here, you'll hear similar thoughts. That is for free. My market analysis I gave away for free. Anything company specific, that's what clients pay me for. The one promise I like to make people is, you may not agree with everything I have to say. You may not like my thoughts about silver or thorium or whatever. But I can promise that we will not spam you with a flood of advertisements. I hate that. You get one email per week from us, and that's it. And, based on that, you can see how I think, see if you like my guidance, and you can consider hiring me as your due diligence guy through my paid services. But the letter's free. And by the way, there's people who like, oh, well, I'm only a free reader. I can't afford your paid services, whatever. But a free reader is valuable to me. My 40,000 best friends, right? That gets me in the room and in the deal with the companies. they will take my calls, they will answer my questions, they will let me on their properties to do due diligence because I have this newsletter audience. So, please don't feel out there that, you're a second-class citizen or something if you're just a free reader. I greatly value that audience.
Awesome. I took a page out of your book. I started a newsletter as well, and I do the same thing. No spam. I'm not selling their email to some marketing company or something like that. It's just them and me. And one email a week, and easily digestible too. You can read the whole thing in 3 to 5 minutes. It's a great newsletter. I highly recommend it. So
thank you, Steve.
Yes. And thank you for tuning in. Be sure to support the show and share this with anyone that you think needs to hear it. It's probably your buddy that can't stop talking about tech stocks. You have yourself a great rest of the day, and we will talk to you next time.